Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to Momenta on the Main Line. We're your hosts. I'm Dr. Joanna Holleran.
And I'm Dr. Ilan Green. We're here to talk about all things health, wellness, fitness, performance, and overall well-being. Hope you enjoy the show.
Today is a sports chiropractor and owner of Rehab Labs Chicago. He grew up in the suburbs of Chicago with a passion for sports. He played football through high school and into college, where he was a Division III All-American defensive back at Wheaton College as a senior. There, he completed his bachelor's degree in applied health science. Upon graduating in 2015, he accomplished his lifelong dream of riding his bicycle from San Francisco to Boston. From then on, the idea of overcoming obstacles became ingrained in his life. Before beginning his graduate studies, he worked as a sports performance coach in Highland Park, where he worked with athletes of all ages. Then, in 2016, he moved to San Jose, California, where he completed his doctorate of chiropractic while earning clinical excellence honors. Now, he provides care for a wide range of individuals, including over 40 professional athletes across various sports. Most notably, he works with multiple active NFL players on the Chicago Bears, helping them to prevent injury and optimize performance. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Michael Risher.
How's it going? Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, welcome. I'm excited to have you. I know we talked about it before, but you've done some really cool stuff in terms of like getting out into practice and pursuing, sports chiropractic and rehab. So I'm really excited to dive into some of those concepts. But first, usually it's a good idea to give some people some background on who you are and some of the path that led up to this point. So, first, what was it that brought you to pursue a career in sports chiropractic?
Yeah. So basically I broke my back when I was in 7th grade, and just very, very typical for my age demographic, spondylolisthesis at L5. So basically fractured in 2 spots, and then one vertebrae slipped forward off of another, and played through an entire baseball, football, and volleyball season. I knew something was wrong, but didn't want to get it checked out because I was dumb. Like if I could go back, I absolutely would have gotten an x-ray almost immediately because it was that bad.
Hey, hindsight's 2020.
Yeah. So, you're young and dumb and you convince your parents that you're fine. But I went to my chiropractor weekly. I went from barely being able to walk going into his office to walking and playing a full week of practice coming out, and just kind of being exposed to chiropractic and how that helped me stay healthy. And I didn't miss a single game throughout my entire football career, even though I had a lot of injuries. I would go see my chiropractor. He would get me rehabbed up, soft tissue work, all of that good stuff. And I was able to play healthy through my entire football career through 10 years. I did not miss a single game. So that was just kind of a testament to how awesome sports chiropractic can be. And really what I learned about myself and kind of what drew me to it was, I love fixing things. I'm not very good at fixing things around the house. It will be functional to a base level, but it's not going to look pretty. And there's probably going to be a screw missing somewhere, but I love fixing things, and I'm an extrovert. I love humans. I love hanging out with people that give me energy. And so when I was thinking of, I'm probably not cut out to be an engineer. There's probably going to be a lot of things that are going to go wrong there, but fixing people made a ton of sense for me. So that was kind of what I realized is I love fixing things. I love people. Why not fixing people?
Yeah, it's interesting too, because I feel like there are a lot of people within, the profession of sports medicine who, like, all of them had sports injuries or something that kind of like led up to that point. And yeah, you're totally right. It's like, in order to be good at working with people, you got to like people, and so it's nice to have a little bit of a background of what it's like to be a patient so that you can put yourself in the patient's shoes too. So I know your chiropractor, it seems like, had a pretty big influence on you. Was there anybody else, like any coaches, trainers, other clinicians that kind of helped to shape your vision of what you wanted to do as a sports chiropractor?
So I actually had two different chiropractors growing up. One that was probably seventh grade through maybe sophomore, junior year of high school. And then kind of my senior year on, that guy got really busy and I needed to be seen more often because obviously my body was getting beat up pretty regularly playing football. And so I went to the guy that I ended up going to was mentored by my former chiropractor. And then he kind of became my mentor as well. So really the two chiropractors were the biggest ones. And then the reason I wanted to work with athletes kind of came down to an internship that I did, a sports performance training at EFT Sports Performance in Highland Park. And I worked with a ton of athletes there, and I saw how much influence these coaches, these sports performance coaches had on the development of young athletes and their off-season training and their in-season and kind of the mental aspect and the encouragement and the everything kind of combined with the sports performance coaching. And I thought, man, these people, and it wasn't necessarily one in particular, maybe this guy, Kerry Neal, who now is the owner of Win Performance. So there were a bunch of people in the sports performance world that kind of trained me, that influenced me. It wasn't a single individual or single instance, but kind of just the being generally trained and seeing what the off season and seeing what the in season was like with these people. It made it a no brainer for me to want to do it.
Yeah. And I mean, in our first episode, we kind of talked about the wide range of availability of sports training out there. And so to have, some exposure, especially, on the training side of what really, really good sports performance training looks like is an absolute game changer. And so, it's cool to see kind of this next evolution of chiropractic, especially sports chiropractic, where there are people like yourself who are kind of bridging that gap between, the manual therapy side of things and the sports performance side of things, what qualifies as rehab, what kind of transitions over into sports performance. And so I'm kind of curious, based on your experience with that, I mean, you're working with some pretty high level athletes, like some of the Chicago Bears athletes. So when you're starting to approach care now in your practice, are there certain things that you're looking for, or like evaluations, assessments, things that help to kind of shape your clinical approach to working with those types of athletes?
Yeah. So I really look at load management as a huge thing. So whether it's a CrossFitter that comes in, I'm asking, okay, how often are you working out every week? Are you doing extra stuff? Or is it just the class? Kind of what phase of training are you in? For the guys that are in season, for the Bears guys or any other professional athlete, it's the same thing. How is your body feeling? How many weeks have you been practicing without a break? What do your rest days look like? How many days of strength training are you doing within that? And then how do we, because I'm a rehab based doctor and your tissues can only handle so much load. So it's okay, how do I get you to do the things that I know are going to be beneficial for you without overloading you and making you do hours and hours of rehab? And then that affects your training and affects your performance. So the biggest thing that I look at is load management. And that varies from person to person. And it's just kind of, how's your body feeling? What is your perceived recovery like? And then, what phase of training you're in, how frequent is it? So that's the main thing that I look at. And then basically with all my evaluations, I look at I use kind of the bio-tensegrity model when I'm thinking about things. And so if you think about it, how much do you have pulling you in one direction? How much do you have pulling in the other direction? And have you been overtraining one aspect, undertraining another aspect? Is one side too tight? Is one side too stretched? All of that bio-tensegrity, I'm kind of checking that within each athlete. And then the final thing I check is reactivity muscle tests. And so this is kind of a gray area. Lots of people like it. Lots of people hate it. Probably more people hate it than like it, but it kind of gives me a good picture. I don't do, so it's called applied kinesiology. I don't do it for any nutritional testing. I don't do it for any allergies. I don't do it to check your acupuncture meridians, any of that stuff. It's more of a neurologic, how quickly is your muscle responding? So I have no doubt that an NFL player is fully strong. Like there's no additional strength training that I need to add to what they're already doing. But if their muscles are not able to respond quickly enough to meet the demands of their sport, then I know that we have an area we need to work on. So I'll kind of look at those three things with kind of a reactive muscle test, the bio-tensegrity model, and then what's their load look like, and how can we manage their load better?
Absolutely. And I think you kind of bring up an interesting point too. So first, it seems like, and I know it probably goes without saying, but context is key for everything, right? And so, when you're looking at, you talked about load management and their perceived, recovery and stuff like that, context of whatever goal they're trying to achieve right now, that's the priority. And so that's important. And then when it comes to, you talked about reactivity muscle testing. I think, like you said, and I know you immediately kind of jump out because I think, especially for people in the industry, especially chiropractic, when you drop the name applied kinesiology, people immediately go toward, like, oh, I know that technique and I don't believe in its philosophy or whatever. But for context, it does, it is a valuable tool to be able to assess somebody's ability to react, ability to kind of contract the right muscle. And especially in what you do, I know you work a lot with specific positions that athletes are in. And so being able to kind of use the concepts of, I won't say applied kinesiology, let's just say reactive muscle testing, to be able to put them in certain positions and then test reactivity to see if they're, for lack of a better word, strong or reactive in those positions. It can kind of help to guide your rehab. Is that correct?
Exactly. And I mean, the patterns that you can find, because and we can get into it. This kind of flows from the bio-tensegrity model and the fascial model. Everything is connected in your body. And it's not just we're working on a bicep or we're working on a tricep. You're working on the whole chain. You're working on the whole shoulder complex at that point. And so if I go in and I'm like, all right, well, I just see hamstring's weak, hamstring, I'm missing the entire picture. So I like the muscle testing as okay, here's a way that we can get a quick snapshot into how you're doing, but let's take that and not just look at the isolated muscle. Let's look at how that affects the entire system. The other thing I'll say specifically for athletes, there's a certain psychological piece too, where if you have a strong muscle test, quote unquote, strong muscle test or a reactive muscle test, and you know that your body is responding quickly, there's more confidence. And from a psychological perspective, you can influence an athlete in that way, where you're like, hey, you're responding really quickly. Look at the difference here, whatever, the flexibility, the responsiveness. When an athlete has more confidence in their body and confidence, just how their body is working, they're going to be better performers on the field or in the weight room or whatever it is.
Back to this idea of these multi kind of like plane fascial patterns. I think sometimes clinicians get caught up in I can't get too far from treating the area. Otherwise, I'm getting way too far out. So if somebody has a shoulder complaint, it's I only look at the shoulder, or somebody has a hip complaint, I only look at the hip. What are some of the things that you've noticed in terms of, I guess this is probably a good time to dive into fascial patterns. So what is your approach to fascial patterns and kind of looking at movement from a wide, open kind of concept?
As far as the movement patterns go, when a lot of people want to train muscles in isolation, and that's totally fine. I don't have any problem with that for kind of your average person. But when you look at how players move on the field, it is there's a lot of very predictable patterns, right? Your gait pattern is very predictable. A throwing pattern is very predictable. A jumping pattern is very predictable. And so when you start to look at kind of the whole picture of what an athlete is and the whole picture of how they move on the field, if you have a quarterback, they have to be able to run, they have to be able to throw, they have to be able to throw on the run, right? And then they have to be able to do that all without thinking about each individual mechanic. So there's so many movement patterns that are just ingrained neurologically that just become second nature. And when you break each one of those things down and you look at, okay, what muscles are firing together, which muscles are moving during this and contracting during this movement, you can kind of gain a greater picture of what the person is required to do. So I know throwing football, that's kind of out there and that's a very niche thing. Not everybody's playing that, but let's talk about a squat. how many people are doing squats, whether it's just sitting in and out of a chair, or doing CrossFit or powerlifting or bodybuilding, whatever it is. There's so many people that do squats. If you look at, if someone comes in like, my knee hurts when I squat, and you only treat the knee and you're just trying to manipulate the joint, you miss the entire kinetic chain. So it's like, okay, well, what if your ankle is weak, or you have a previous injury there that now you have an ankle that's collapsing and then a knee that's collapsing, and now you have weird torque on the knee. And so you start to look at all these things. Okay, my hip hurts. Well, what happened with the ankle? What's going on with the upper body? What's going on with the breathing? And so if you just try and treat the pain and just look at the single joint or the single muscle and say, oh, let's try and get the pain out of here, you're missing an entire picture of how that person's moving. Because if someone says, I have knee pain during a squat, and you just treat the knee, you're assuming that they're only using their knee in that movement, when in reality, it's every single spinal vertebrae. They're using their diaphragm, they're using their hip flexors, they're using front and back muscles in their legs, they're using hip, knee, ankle, toes. Like, if you just look at the single isolated place, you're missing the entire picture of what a human does in movement. And so the fascial trains, it's a more organized way of thinking of that, essentially, where you say, okay, bottom of the toe is connected up the back to the top of the head. And that's a very simple way of saying it, where the hamstring has a start and an end. The fascia is continuous through that entire length of toe to back of the head. You can have calf start and end. Fascia is continuous up through the hamstring, up through the glute, up through the back, up into the neck and the head. So that's kind of the overall picture, where you gain a much more complete understanding of humans as movers and what's actually going on when you look at it as instead of individual units, you look at it as entire fascial system.
Yeah, I love that you use that point too, because there's a study that they performed that showed that even just stretching in your lower extremity improved cervical range of motion because of those long chain fascial planes, right? And so I think sometimes when a concept it seems more abstract, when you break it down and kind of break it into those details and demonstrate how everything is connected, it starts to make more sense. And that's when you can start getting more detailed in terms of your approach to things. So with some specific questions about your approach, you talked about movement patterns, and then there's also different stimuli that you're putting in place to get specific adaptations. So part of it is, if I'm understanding correctly, it's looking at the quality of the movement pattern, but then you're also trying to get specific adaptations like strengthening a movement pattern. Mm-hmm. And so my question is, I know we talked a little bit about, looking at the way somebody moves and trying to make sure that they're efficient and strong through the pattern. But in terms of some of the rehab approaches, like what types of loads or ways that you apply loads to athletes to get that sort of adaptation that you're looking for in the myofascial system? Like, what's your process for approaching that?
Yeah. So I'm going to start that. That's a simple answer if you just want that, but it makes much more sense in the context of when you're looking at the patterns. Everything is intuitive in how you move, right? If you're stepping, you have opposite arm, opposite leg, pecs contracting, lats relaxing, right? Quad hip flexors going. And so you have these natural patterns where if you just watch people move and watch people move properly, that whole thing makes sense. Now, what I try to do is exaggerate those movement patterns. And basically a concept I like to use is training muscles in the FEP, the fully extended position. And if you're strongest in the fully shortened position, your muscle is strongest in the fully shortened position. And that's always going to be the case. Your curl is always going to be the strongest at the top. Your bench is always going to be strongest at the lockout.
Yeah. Length tension relationships. Yeah.
Exactly. And so kind of when you're training muscles, that's going to be the strongest place to train, right? But what we find is if you stretch the muscle fully, then you're also stretching the fascia around it. And we can get really deep into the weeds with the histology and kind of the structure of fascia. We don't necessarily need to go there, but the whole concept is, or one of the main concepts is using a slow eccentric or a slow lengthening into that fully extended position, not just of a single muscle, but of the entire fascial chain. And so what that kind of does is the slow eccentric helps strengthen the collagen fibers in the fascia. And so when you're doing the slow eccentric, you get a lot of muscle, like you're using your muscles. I'm not going to say that you're ignoring the muscles and just training the fascia, but there's a fascial emphasis because we're doing a slow eccentric into a fully extended position. And the eccentric is going to help align and strengthen the collagen fibers. And really we're going for the entire fascial chain, not just a singular muscle. So that's kind of the way that I do it. First of all, is let's make sure that your tissue is organized. I don't know if you follow Fascial Nerd on Instagram.
Yep.
He's phenomenal. Rob Umphris, he's awesome. He's put a couple of these things out, and they're great bullet points that kind of you can know, but he's verbalized them really well. And so basically the principle of fascia number 2 that he has on his Instagram post is fascia remodels in the direction that tension is applied. And so if you want your fascia to be strengthened in a position, you need to be in that position to strengthen it. And that's kind of why I take these movement patterns and then exaggerate them a little bit, because you're operating in the place of most strength. You're never going to be at the fully extended position in a sport. So we need to, in order to strengthen the fascia, we need to organize it along that entire range of motion. And so we're remodeling the fascia in the direction that we want it to, that we want to ingrain the movement pattern. The other piece is, and this is kind of the second way that we train the fascia. Fascia actually has elastic recoil properties. And so you think of, you think of the counter or depth jumps rather, or a counter movement jump, right? You're so much more explosive when you can get a little bit of load and a little bit of recoil in. Does some of that come from muscle? Absolutely, most of it. But does a lot of it also come from the elastic recoil in the entire fascial pattern? I believe so. And I think there's enough research out there to support that claim where it's okay, maybe we haven't studied this exact specific thing, but when you take the body of evidence, you can draw a natural conclusion that these elastic principles that fascia can be utilized in sports. So now we go, okay, let's kind of remodel the tissue. Let's do those slow eccentrics, the slow lengthening into that fully extended position of the muscle and the chain. Once we've hit that part where we feel like we have a requisite amount of organization, then we go into some plyometrics. And so now I'll do kind of a rebound and a recoil quick out, trying to stimulate that elastic process. So plyometrics or like quick overspeed eccentrics and anything banded where it's pulling you over speed into that, depth jumps, all of these plyometric principles we're doing within these specific movement patterns now that, translate to your sport.
Right. And so I'm going to go back a little bit because I know you talked about, like people not believing that like fascia has a role in that whole thing. And I think I'm going to repeat myself on the context word, but I think it's a theme here where it's context is super important for the type of rehab or training that you're trying to accomplish. And so I think sometimes, like you were saying, it's like somebody were like, oh yeah, well, you have to train the muscles or you have to train the tendons or whatever it is. But I think the context of what you're training for probably determines what you're trying to focus on. So sometimes when we talk about performance training, how it's like fascia helps to transfer forces along the body, which helps to improve performance or force output, right? Then we're talking about trying to get everything working together. Whereas when we talk about more of like a rehab standpoint, it's like, oh, we're trying to rehab a tendon injury or a fascial injury or a muscle injury. And that's when you're just trying to implement like some sort of exercise or load to specifically get a response from that tissue. But I think sometimes we're asking the wrong question of like, what's the thing doing the most work in this movement pattern when we talk about performance? And the answer is like all of them.
Right.
But I think sometimes, like you said, it's like people focus too much on the muscle or the tendon and leave out the fascia and that whole connection and miss this opportunity to get full length and tension through their training patterns, which is why I think From my standpoint, what you're doing is so interesting and cool because you're taking it that next step to take fascia into consideration and training that whole pattern. So I guess when it comes to those types of contexts, performance training and rehab, because you do both, do you find is there anything that you change in terms of the load that you apply when you're trying to rehab somebody post-injury versus when you're trying to improve their performance? And is there any kind of crossover there?
Yeah. So when I also want to clarify, I think that a well-rounded training protocol has fascial training as a portion of it, but not the only thing, right?
Right. Yeah.
I'm not saying only go out and do this one sort of exercise, right? So when we work with Justin Fields in season, he does 2 lifts a week with his team, right? He's doing deadlifts, lower body emphasis day 1, and then upper body emphasis day 2. And he's lifting weights. He's doing deadlift. He's doing bench press, pull-ups, like all of that great strength training. We also do our fascial training with him. We also do plyometrics. We also do sleds, right? I have him part of keeping him healthy and operating at top speed is 3 top speed sprints a week, right? So we have a full range of what we do. It's not just the fascial training. Okay. So just want to
not just what people see on Instagram,
right? Not just what people see on it. There's a lot more than we can't look at one Instagram post and think that fully encapsulates the entire training protocol. Like that's not what
just
we're
to throw it out there.
just saying.
Continue.
So there's a ton of overlap, and I will say that everything we do the rehabilitation from an injury is much more specific and targeted, and the prevention includes everything that we do in the rehab, but is expanded. And so if I get someone that's injury free, I'm taking them through all of the movement patterns that I think are beneficial for them, knowing their sport, knowing their position. And so we're doing a bunch of different things. We're taking them through plyometrics. We're taking them through the slow eccentrics. We're doing all the soft tissue throughout the whole chain. Now, if I get someone with an injury, that's where we kind of have to narrow the focus just a little bit, because if I have a Bears player with a pulled hamstring, he could care less how his shoulder is moving if he cannot use his hamstring, right? And so maybe we have to work up the chain into the shoulder. I've had that before. I got a crazy story I can share with you at the end about how we fixed someone's foot by working on their rotator cuff. It was absolutely insane. Like I have no explanation other than the fascial chain. It was wild. But we can talk about that a little bit later. But you have to narrow the focus. And so when you have these muscle injuries or the joint injuries, I like to look specifically at eccentric only at first. And even if we can't do that, I look at isometric first, because if you can't even bear the load, I'll do just isometric. So just these static holds. And then once they can tolerate an eccentric or the lengthening portion, then we do eccentric only essentially. And then kind of once we get past that pain stage and I feel like we can add in concentric, then we add in some concentric. And then once we're tolerating that well, then we move back to the entire focus. So you look at, when you have an injury, we go back to the fascia's remodeling in the direction that tension is applied. You are specifically focusing on that one injury plus that whole fascial chain. So if we have a hamstring, now I'm focusing on plantar fascia, calf, hamstring, glute, all up the paraspinals up to the skull, right? That's my main focus, is that specific chain. And we're doing slow isometrics, slow eccentrics, and then all of the soft tissue on that area. And so that's how I would say it varies, is you have the entire training system. You're trying to get full range of motion in all the joints. You're trying to train a bunch of different chains. But when you have an injury, you have to narrow that focus a lot, because like I said, if you have a hamstring injury, you could care less how your shoulder is doing if you can't run, right? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how great your shoulder feels and how well your shoulder's moving if you can't run and play your sport anyway.
Yeah. So I'm also kind of curious too, because I think that, naturally, any really good clinician is going to draw from a lot of different sources. And I know that you're somebody who took their time to learn a lot of different concepts and draft your own approach to things. And so, for anybody listening who's either practicing and looking to get more into it, or who's a student who might be learning, or somebody who's just interested in the topic in general, are there any resources or things that you find would be helpful to dive into some of these concepts?
Yeah. So first of all, I think the book Anatomy Trains by Thomas Thomas Myers with an S at the end, is really good. It kind of outlines the whole fascial system really well. I think there are a handful of kind of, for lack of a better term, movement coaches out there that are really good. I think The Secret of Athleticism, Coach Chong Chi is
we can always link it after. So don't worry about.
So Chong is good. I think, as much as I dislike the GOTA guys and how they interact with people, I think they have a lot of good stuff. The basis of their training, I think, is misguided, and I think they're absolute jerks. But I think they do have a lot of good things that they do. So I don't want to knock them completely. They do have a lot of good things.
Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right?
Exactly. Like, take what you can learn from them, because they obviously have something that is effective, that helps people. So kind of look at all of that. You can check me out. But really, anyone that you can tell how successful someone is at what they're doing, not by how many Instagram followers they have, although that kind of creates social currency and it's kind of cool, but more, how do their athletes perform and how healthy do their athletes stay? So if you want to be the best at any one thing, look at the people who are training the best athletes and who have the healthiest athletes. And I think you look at those two things, and if you can kind of do the research yourself, whoever has those two things, those are going to be the people that you want to draw from. And they may not have everything right. I guarantee they don't have everything, or I guarantee I don't have everything right. But I do know that if I'm pulling a lot of correct things from people that are doing things right, I'm going to have a really full picture of what I want to do.
Yeah. Well, so I guess kind of going into that, I know you're working on your own kind of concept with regards to fascial neurology. And so, rather than have me try to explain it, do you kind of want to go into a little bit of summary of what you're working on and what fascial neurology is all about?
Yeah, so we're still working on the naming of it. I like fascial neurology.
That's okay. I won't hold you to that. But
we're gonna see if that one sticks. We're playing around with a bunch of different names right now. But for lack of better term, the fascial neurology, and that could be the one we go with. The fascial neurology deals with two different things, right? Fascia is highly innervated, so you're dealing with a large amount of nerves when you're dealing with fascia. So we're training the fascia, we're training your body's proprioception, we're training your body's ability to do movement patterns through these kind of this fascial lens, right? It's not a strength and conditioning program. It is a more rehab, prehab based thing. So you're training the fascia again with these slow eccentrics, some isometrics, and then moving into certain plyometrics. And we focus on a bunch of different movement patterns, sport specific, non-sport specific, just kind of general population stuff. But the big thing that I think separates it is we want your brain to understand the movement pattern so that it is second nature to you, right? When a guy is getting tackled on the football field and his cleat is stuck in the ground, I don't want him to think, oh shoot, I have to, squeeze my hamstring, press my big toe into the ground, and tibialis anterior and all these different things. I want him to have practiced it so many times in his body to have understood that movement pattern that boom, okay, knees hyperextending, all of these muscles, this whole pattern kicks in, and I know that I'm immediately going to pull myself out of it. And so while I can't claim 100% kind of responsibility for it, there have been a handful, and I can send you the pictures. There have been a handful of like very extreme knee hyperextension where you look at and you're like, how did this guy not just blow his ACL out? And I fully believe if you watch it in slow motion. Some people are born with it a little bit more than others, and some people have to train it. But I fully believe that these movement patterns help protect ACLs, help protect hamstrings, calves, ankles, all of this stuff. Where if I showed you these pictures, just the still frame of how hyperextended the knee is, and said this guy was out for 2 plays and that's it, you would not believe me. And so what we want is the neurology piece is you're going to train it so that your brain and your body are in such sync that immediately as something happens, your body reacts to it. If you step off a curb, I want your body to be so ingrained in this pattern that you don't roll your ankle.
Yeah. And I think on that note too, it's like if we fully understood how injuries occurred, then we'd probably have a really, really good idea of how to prevent them. But we're still figuring that out. Nobody knows 100%. But I do think you're on the right track, because it's a multifaceted thing where, I mean, you touched on confidence level going in, or confidence going into it, determines our confidence in how we move. And if we're not feeling great, then we're probably not going to move, with high quality. At the same time, there's also that sense of like, what role does anatomic load even play in it? Obviously there's going to be a certain amount of load that's going to rupture some sort of tissue. But just because you get into some of those extreme positions doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to place the amount of load on it. And so then you touched on this concept about how we adapt to be able to manage certain stimuli. And there is that phase. And I think it's actually important. I'm glad that you brought it up, because when we first introduce like a movement pattern thing to an athlete, they're not used to it. And it takes a ton of conscious effort. And then the more that they practice it, the less that they have to think about it. And the less that they have to think about it, the more it becomes just the way that they do things. And so that's that kind of 3-step process of, making something, just your natural, like I can wake up and get out of bed, and that's just the way that I do things. And so I think that it's also important to note, especially for, practicing clinicians and students, that takes time and repetition. It's not something that somebody's going to get just, immediately in one visit. It's something that you have to have patience with. And you probably know that, being, working with these guys. So I'm curious, before we kind of get into the final lightning round, and I think we got a ton of good stuff. I think there's a lot of stuff that we could probably do another podcast on, especially when it comes to some of the specifics. But I'm curious about the case that you were talking about with the rotator cuff, if you want to drop some clinical pearls and knowledge on that.
No, totally. And I mean, and just kind of going back to that timeline piece real quick.
Yeah.
Typically what I notice with the fascial neurology is you feel a difference immediately, but you're not able to maintain that difference for about a month to 2 months, right? So you're looking at 4 to 8 weeks before you're like, oh, okay, this is starting. And that's doing it every day before you're like, okay, this is starting to be an unconscious thing that happens, and your body just starts. So it's you can feel the difference right away. You can feel the fascial patterns immediately, but it's all conscious until depending on kind of what level you're at, a month to 2 months. And so I tell people, just because this helps right now doesn't mean you should stop doing it. You have to continue it for 2 months every day, because that at the end of 2 months, you're going to look back and be like, oh, okay, now I see the difference, versus just kind of having the 1 week, oh, that helped with the pain, I'm done.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of the timeline there, where it takes at least a month of doing it every single day consistently before your brain starts to do it subconsciously. Sometimes more. I've seen people take up to 3 months of doing it every single day before I can say, hey, can you do this thing? And they can just rip it off without thinking about it, So let's talk about the shoulder.
This case study. Yeah.
This one, I wish I would have taken better notes on. He's a buddy of mine. So we were just kind of shooting the breeze, and I did not take nearly as good of notes as I should have.
I'm just curious. I think at least like, because I know we talked about a lot of concepts to approach and things that you're looking at. So I figured it'd just be a cool opportunity to look at, like one case where something kind of jumped out at you,
Yeah, no, absolutely. So basically this guy comes in and he's like, he's a trainer and like a fitness trainer, not an athletic trainer. And he does a lot of FRC And so for those of you that don't know FRC, it's a kind of a technique and a certification that you can get that's about joint movement and muscle tension. And so he's very aware of his body. And he goes, when I do, I believe it was like inversion of my foot and then hip flexion, like straight leg hip flexion, I have a really bad pain at the bottom of my foot. And so it was affecting him during certain like running or lifting. But the one time he could replicate it on the table, he's like, every single time it's inversion of my foot with hip flexion. And that causes me pain on the bottom of my foot. It's like 7 out of 10 bad. And so he had been working with a physical therapist for a month or two, worked on the bottom of the foot, tons of soft tissue, tons of exercises, no change. All right, well, let's move to the calf, because maybe there's some tension there, calf and ankle. They worked on the calf and ankle for another month, no change, like literally zero change. And so he comes in and those are the first two things that I'll look at. I'm not going to say immediately, oh, you got a foot problem. Let's check out your opposite shoulder. So I just don't want that to be clear. Like, I'm not crazy. Yeah. I'm going with the most likely answer first. And so fortunately he came to me and he'd already done 2 months of rehab on foot, ankle, calf with no dice. So now we start moving through this whole fascial pattern. We're doing some hamstring stuff, no change. We're doing some hip stuff, no change. We do some low back stuff, no change. Oh, my dog. Oh, buddy, are you all right? My dog just got caught in my computer charger and jumped off my lap and ate it pretty hard. He looks all right though.
He's resilient, yeah.
Resilient pup. So we go through that whole thing. We check hamstring, hip, low back, and I'm like, and no change. And I'm like, all right, dude, this is gonna seem really weird. And I'm gonna be honest with you. I have not done this treatment for this thing before, but we're gonna try it because we're kind of out of options here. And so we started working on his rotator cuff, and I was doing some Graston work on his rotator cuff, really on the tendinous insertions. And I'm like, how does this feel? And he raised his foot. He's like, oh that's much better. His range of motion without pain improved. And I'm like, all right, that's weird, but super cool. So I think it was his right foot. We're working on his left rotator cuff. And so we're doing the soft tissue. It's improving a little bit, but kind of plateaus. We had an hour to work, so spent about 5 minutes, starts plateauing. And I'm like, all right, I'm not going to overdo the soft tissue load there. So we start looking at, so I'm like, all right, what exercises, what kind of properties of the fascia and properties of the muscle can we use? And I landed on overspeed eccentrics of the rotator cuff. And so what that looked like was he was standing upright, and I had a band behind his wrist, and I asked him to continually throw his wrist back into external rotation and let the band shoot his wrist forward into internal rotation. So he's doing rotator cuff movements, but every single time he does it, he's just throwing his wrist back, and then the band's shooting him forward faster than gravity would, and he has to catch it. And so we did 10 reps there, 20 reps there, had him lay back down on the table, and it was like 90% better. And he's like, I have no idea what just happened, but my foot pain is gone. I'm like, all right, let's do some more. And so I gave him these as homework. We did a little bit more. We did some kind of slow eccentrics and a little bit more, but his foot pain was 100% gone. And it was all because we were working on the left shoulder, like legitimate. I talked to him every couple of weeks and checked in with him a couple of weeks later. He's like, yeah, I haven't had a single problem with my foot since we worked on my shoulder.
And I'm really glad. I think that's an awesome place to kind of finish up with, because I think it kind of sums up, I feel like that story sums up, who you are. Stay curious, right? And stay open-minded. You never know. And sometimes, especially in what we do, it's like, you don't have to have the answer of exactly how things happen. Sometimes things just work because you're willing to stay open-minded and just kind of, be curious in the process. So that's really cool.
Little background on him that I remembered from his history after I'd worked on that. He had broken his left collarbone 2 years earlier, and his range of motion on the left shoulder was always restricted. And all of a sudden there's all these pieces that start to come in, little neck injury on the left side, collarbone injury on the left side. Like all of these things started to add up, and you're like, all right, well, we should have done shoulder rehab for you a long time ago, but let's do some now.
Yeah, when tissue is all connected, you never know how tissue changes in one place might affect another. So take the whole thing into consideration. Okay, I got a lightning round of questions for you. They're just fun questions that we like to ask everybody at the end of an episode. So, first one, if you're ready, yeah. Okay,
let's do it.
What is the most influential book you've ever read?
The most influential book I've ever read, outside of the Bible, which is absolutely influential.
That counts.
Well, I want to go Wild at Heart by John Eldridge.
Okay. And then next question. What book are you reading right now?
The book I'm reading right now is it's called, what is it called? It's functional or fascial manipulation part, practical part, first level. So I'm reading that. It's a Stecco soft tissue. And then I'm also reading Cokeland about the Koch brothers.
Sweet. Yeah. Little work stuff and a little fun.
Yep, exactly.
If you could have any meal delivered to your door tonight from anywhere in the world, what would it be?
Oh man. I am going with In-N-Out.
I was joking about asking you why would it be In-N-Out, but I didn't know that you'd actually have that answer.
Yeah. No, it's gotta be In-N-Out. That's the only thing that I feel like I can't fully get in Chicago. I can get a burrito. That's good. I can get the sushi. I can get the poke. I can't get In-N-Out. And that's the one meal that's truly missing from my life.
I can't get it in some either. If I ever order it, I'll order you some too.
I appreciate it. I'm going out to California in like 2 weeks. I'm absolutely going to eat it every day.
Perfect. Last question. If you could go back in time and give advice to a younger version of yourself, what piece of advice would you give? Three things. Number one, invest in Bitcoin early. Number two is play soccer and do gymnastics. Those are the two things. I did not play either of those sports. Those would have helped a ton. And number three is get your back x-rayed early on, because it's not worth the injury to play through things in 8th grade. Yeah, all fantastic pieces of advice. Yeah. All right, cool. Well, so before we wrap up, where can people find you?
So you can find me on Instagram at Dr.Michael Risher. On Twitter at Dr. Risher. And then I don't know. I don't really use LinkedIn, but you can find me on Michael Risher on LinkedIn, I guess. And then if you do, I get a lot of people that will want to email me. Feel free to email me at rehablabchicago@gmail.com. More than I might not get back to you same day, but I try to get back to everybody that sends me an email with questions. So those are the best spots to find me. Cool. And then before we leave, any projects or anything you want to let people know about that you're working on, anything coming up in the future that people should keep an eye out for? Yeah, so I'm working on kind of this whole fascial neurology. We're going to make a course as well as daily programming. So go on my Instagram, check out some of the videos. If it looks appealing, then the course is definitely going to be for you. We're hoping to launch March 1st, 2022, or at least in that range right now. And we're kind of in the building process. An organizational process. So I'm super excited about that, because right now I'm very limited to the number of people that I can get my hands on. And so I'm excited to be able to expand, because I'll have people message me from other countries. And I can't really give them a good outline of here's what you do, because we don't have it built out yet, or videos. It's like, here's this Instagram video that I did. So I'm really excited to have kind of a course that's going to teach everyone the hows and whys of the fascial neurology, and then at the end incorporate daily programming where, hey, if you want to improve this pain generally, if you want to improve as an athlete, here's programming that you can do to kind of accelerate that and move yourself along that path. So that's coming out 2022, hoping for March. We got a little ways to go here, but super excited for that.
Yeah, very cool. Well, yeah, thank you again for taking the time. That was a lot of fun. I'm selfish. I always have a lot of fun talking to you and nerding out about this stuff. So we'll definitely do another one, dive into some more concepts, especially when you release that program. Yeah, thanks so much, man. I'm looking forward to doing it again soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. This was a blast.
Yeah, cool. All right.